All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. We're happy to have Loren here. Loren's an operations manager with the Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services, and he'll be sharing a bit about the agency and some new initiatives that they have. I'm Bree Steyer. I'm with AIWP, and this webinar is part of our monthly professional development webinar series. So we will be doing one of these each month featuring an expert in some sort of topic area related to workforce here in the state of Iowa. If you are interested in becoming an AIWP member, I would love to have a conversation with you about it. I will put my contact information in the chat box, and feel free to email me or give me a call to see what it's like to be an AIWP member and all of the services that we offer our members. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Loren for the rest of the presentation. Oh, I think you're muted, Loren.
Okay, good. Okay, now we got it. Thank you, Bree, and thanks everybody for connecting in this morning. I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint screen here. As we go, if there's a kind of a pause in the action and you have a question, feel free to chime in. I'll try as best I can with Bree's help to keep track of the chat box. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions as well. So with that said, I thought I would start with Okay, so I thought I'd start with a little background on what is the Bureau, what is BRS, and just kind of give you a little background on who we are and then get into what we're here to talk about today. So what is BRS? Okay, so the Bureau, which are essentially the office that is now known as the Bureau, was founded in 1975 by Governor Robert Ray. What was going on back in the 1970s? Some of you may remember the Vietnam War. And when the United States left South Vietnam, at the end of that war, a lot of the North Vietnamese were come streaming in. So a lot of people throughout Southeast Asia were getting into whatever they could find that would float and fleeing for their lives because they'd either been, part of the South Vietnam government or just citizens of South Vietnam, or possibly have been supportive of the US during that Vietnam War. We were founded by Governor Robert Ray. And the way that came about was, at the time, the president was Gerald Ford. He put out a call to all of the nation's governors, about the Vietnamese boat people, as they were called, because what was happening was, like I said, people were packing themselves into anything that would float. They were being interdicted at sea by commercial vessels, naval vessels, you name it. And many of them were in very, very bad shape, obviously, because, they were, many people packed into whatever they could find that would float. And, they may have run out of food and or gotten lost or something like that. So it was a humanitarian crisis. Governor Ray responded to that call and said, Iowa can help. And this quote that I've put on this slide, we're talking about not where these people are going to live, but whether they're going to live. And so over the course of the next several years, decade or so, we resettled 20 to 30,000 Southeast Asians in Iowa. Governor Ray made it very clear from the beginning, if we're going to offer to kind of make home, to help these people make homes here in Iowa, they were going to be expected to go to work as soon as possible. So Iowa's program has always been, since the 1970s, what's known as a work first program. So refugees are expected to move to what we call economic self-sufficiency as rapidly as possible. And often this means working in things like learning English, like getting kids enrolled in school, getting medical checkups, getting treatment. All of those things have to be arranged around finding and accepting that first job that is minimally acceptable according to refugee resettlement regulations. So basically, if you're an able-bodied adult capable of doing physical labor, whether you like it or not, unless a medical professional says that would be harmful to you, you have to accept that job. There are some exceptions for jobs that would violate your religious beliefs, and we honor those exceptions as well. But most refugees, this does mean their first job in the US, particularly if they have very limited English, will be an entry-level production type job, either in our food processing industries or our hospitality industries, those kinds of things. And then refugees, if they want to pursue some other type of career, that needs to be arranged around that job that covers their basic bills. Why do we have a refugee program? And because there are a lot of refugees. The United Nations current estimate is that there are 79.5 million displaced people in the world today. That includes 26 million refugees. The official international law definition of a refugee is a person who has fled their native country and cannot return due to a well-founded fear that they would be persecuted if they were to return. So what happens generally is a refugee will flee a conflict area because either a war is broken out or there's a conflict, or, you know, in many cases we hear this term we euphemistically call ethnic cleansing. So in those instances, the official government of the country has determined some subset of its population doesn't belong there anymore. And there's often some rationale for that. Your people only moved here 300 years ago, so you're not really part of our community. And for those folks, yeah, if they do not flee that country, they could be killed. Their property will be taken. Because as far as the official policy of whatever regime is in charge is concerned, they don't belong there. So what happens is they will flee, and usually in those situations, the UN might get involved and might set up refugee camps in a neighboring country. And many refugees who come to the United States may have spent 10 or 20 years in a refugee camp in a foreign country. So you apply to the United Nations claiming refugee status. The United Nations then determines whether indeed your fear of return to your native country is well-founded. And if they agree, then you are a refugee. Then once you're identified as a refugee, the United Nations looks at three possible solutions, or what they call a durable solution. The camp is just meant to be a temporary solution, although, as we just discussed, temporary can mean decades. So the first solution they want to look at is, can we just keep you safe and sheltered? I mean, a refugee camp is not a, you know, it's not a resort community, so but can we at least keep you safe? in sanitary conditions and with enough to eat? And is there any possibility the situation in your native country would resolve itself and you would be allowed to go back home? If it looks like that's not going to be possible, then they look at the second solution, which would be resettlement in a nearby country where there wouldn't be as much of a culture shock, I guess, for the displaced person. And if that does not seem feasible, because many of these countries in these conflict areas just don't have the economic ability to accept 500,000 or 1 million new citizens, just kind of because a nearby country has decided to displace them. So then they look at the durable solution of resettlement to a third country like the United States. Up until the current administration, the United States officially resettled more refugees every year than the rest of the world combined, which I think was certainly something to be proud of. But to be fair, though, there are other nations providing temporary shelter to many, many more refugees than have ever been resettled in the United States. So we just need to kind of keep the United States approach to the world refugee crisis in proper perspective, because other countries are also bearing very heavy burdens because of these realities of 26 million refugees, 46 million internally displaced. These are people who may have fled from a conflict zone to another part of their country where the war is not raging so much, but they still can't return home. 4.2 million are asylum seekers. Here in the United States, our laws around asylum are, if you appear at a border or at a port of entry, or you are within the United States and you have this fear of persecution if you were forced to return to your native country, you apply to the United States government for asylum, and then that your application is processed and either accepted or denied. And then obviously we have the Venezuelan conflict, which has to date displaced 3.6 million Venezuelans who are sheltering in other countries. So read this. In the time it took you to read those two words, another person was displaced somewhere in the world. So we see our world has a lot of conflict, and we have a lot of people who are caught up in those conflicts who, probably have no stake in that conflict and just would like an opportunity to live in peace. So where do Iowa's refugees come from? This is the last 10 years. I realize it's a giant page of numbers. It is kind of arranged by ascending order. So you can see over the last 10 years, Iowa has admitted about almost 6,000 refugees. The highest refugee sending conflict area is Burma, then Congo and Burundi. And I'm kind of a chart geek, so I'm going to inflict this on you. But if you look at how refugee populations, particularly cultural areas, how that resettlement process works, generally it will start out slow and then grow and grow and grow, because in the past, the UN would concentrate resources on a particular area and try to process as many refugees as possible. And that would result in much higher numbers being approved for US resettlement. The vetting process for a refugee who is proposed for resettlement in the United States takes anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So it's a lot of additional vetting was put in place after 9/11, when the program was basically shut down for 2 years following the 9/11 terrorist attacks, even though none of the terrorists had come to the US as refugees. But a lot of additional security measures were put in place. And so like I said, that lengthened the approval process for a refugee that the UN is seeking to resettle in the US significantly. So, but you can see our current Congo and Burundi conflict area, this is the one that's on the rise right now. The major Burmese resettlement effort is kind of waning somewhat, but there are still many Burmese living in refugee camps in Thailand. So, Iowa Bureau of Refugees, the US Code does designate that each state must have a state coordinator for refugees, and they provide funds for states to do that. So the US Code specifies each state must designate a state coordinator. Our office, and specifically my boss, Mak Sucheska, is the current state coordinator for Iowa. We do the state plan and budget for refugee services. We conduct quarterly consults with resettlement partners around the state. We're the single point of contact with the federal government for this funding. We do community consultation, employer consultation, INR administer refugee-oriented funding. We fund the state refugee health coordinator position at the Iowa Department of Public Health. We administer refugee grants. We currently administer the community-based ESL grant that LSI has currently, Lutheran Services in Iowa. Sorry, I often use too many acronyms. They have the current contract for that, but that is state funds. And then we also have a refugee, sorry, I went the wrong way. We also have a refugee mental health grant that we're just wrapping up, and we'll be implementing some of the findings from that grant. We work on system improvement, work on outreach and education. And then as we are also a service provider. So we provide the promised job services for refugees in Iowa. We administer refugee cash assistance, medical assistance, provide case management to refugees. We have an Iowa Refugee Wellness Initiative that provides additional support for refugees who have medical treatment needs. And then obviously employment services are a big part of what we do. So for the refugee job seeker, we look at what kinds of training might be available and help them. We offer a WorkWise training class for less experienced refugees. It's a 4-week full immersion class where we can take a refugee from any culture in the world, any level of English language, and over the course of 4 weeks, get them to 100 to 300 words in the English language, which is, the beginning, at least, of a survival level of English proficiency. But we do all the typical job stuff, in addition to dealing with family and household things that refugees experience that they just need education, they need information about, because they're coming from a very, very different culture and don't know the norms and expectations here in the United States. So some quick facts for our federal fiscal year 2019, which, yes, we just ended fiscal year 2020, but I haven't done all the statistics for all that yet. So you're getting last year's statistics. So for 19, we served 2,180 refugees, made 270 job placements at an average pay rate of $11.96. So one of the things we talk about when we talk to people who have services that are available for refugees, and refugees are considered lawful permanent residents here from the day they arrive. So they qualify for anything a citizen would qualify. They're work authorized from day one, And so we do like to talk to people that have refugees among folks asking for their services, to be the bridge, because we know people are coming from vastly different cultures that have vastly different understanding. So we want people to try to be cognizant of that, be aware of it, and do what you can to make sure you're not dealing with a cultural misunderstanding if you're seeing, behaviors that it's like, why are they not cooperating with what I'm asking? I mean, why are they having trouble understanding this? So we do ask folks to consider, and you can just ask the question, in our culture, when you're applying for a job, you generally are very careful to make sure that everything is printed correctly on that application. How does that work in your culture? You can just ask those kinds of questions. So when I talk about culture, I like the image of an iceberg, because we all need to think about the fact that we all grew up in a culture. We all have our culture that is, helps us make sense of the life we live. But the reason I like the iceberg is most of those beliefs, most of those understandings are not visible. Most of that is the below the surface stuff. So it's the behaviors, beliefs, symbols that they accept without thinking about them. And they're passed along by communication, imitation from generation to generation. So in human services world, when we think about things like, what are expectations on parents? What are some expectations for parents that would get a set of parents in trouble if they didn't meet those expectations? Where are those written down? Nowhere. So in 2015, the Department of Human Services, through our DCAT programs, awarded Visiting Nurses Services, which is now Every Step, a contract to develop a refugee and immigrant guide program. The impetus for this is pretty sad. We had a refugee father who had come into contact with the child welfare system and somehow internalized to himself that this was the government saying he's a bad dad. And he killed himself. And so the department decided we wanted to try to, can we give our child welfare and juvenile justice systems some assistance in helping be that bridge? And so we let the contract and started it. And then in 2017, as we were doing a program review, the department asked the Bureau to kind of do some analysis. So we dug in, looked at how it was operating, and discovered there were some difficulties in the deployment. There was a lot of role confusion. So the people that were hired to help be that bridge, we didn't know what they were expected. Were they supposed to be caseworkers? Were they just interpreters? What was going on? Social workers and juvenile court officers who were, asking for these folks to help them with interactions with refugee and immigrant families, but weren't sure about what they could expect from those folks too. So we did better define the role of the refugee immigrant guide, clarified they're not there to be court interpreters because there's a lot of legal liabilities and testing and things that a court interpreter really needs to go through to make sure that we're protecting the rights of that person who does not have full English proficiency. So we did a more definition of the role, And basically, it's a combination of a community outreach worker, an interpreter, and an advocate. And we do trainings on that routinely now for the rig workers themselves and for our social work and juvenile court officer staffs. So what does this all have to do with apprenticeship? Basically, for as long as I've been doing this business, one of the things that bothers me is if you think back to that kind of resettlement graph and how once a new general area, conflict area in the world is identified for a kind of a surge in resourcing by the US Department of State and the UN, to see if there's a way to move some of these refugees out of the camps. What happens when that first begins? Often those cultures will kind of prioritize younger bilingual or multilingual refugees who have enough English to be able to help with interpretation, things like that. They come first and we hire them. So we hire them to help interpret for our casework staff or for whoever might need it. The issue is, as that process grows and as we get more and more people from that conflict area, the need for those folks to provide the basic interpretation begins to wane. So, we don't have a future role for them, because even though they've been working side by side with professional credentialed caseworkers, there's no career path for them. So our federal funder had identified some funding for a youth mentoring project. And in Iowa, we proposed to use that funding to do some career pathing for those helpers. And we're starting with our initial focus on the RIG program. So basically, the youth mentoring set aside, that's just the funding stream we use. And what we're going to be doing is building an apprenticeship. So those refugees, and like I said, we're starting with a focus on the RIG program. So those refugees working in the RIG program have a career path to attain the same credential as the folks they're supporting in allowing customers or facilitating customer access to those services. So if you look at Future Ready Iowa's idea or guidance to both employers and future apprenticeships, a registered apprenticeship combines the on-the-job training with related classroom instruction, where the registered apprentice receives a paycheck from day one. For educators and employers, learn how to develop a program. We're not going through the high school registered apprentice webinars, but basically we are building an apprenticeship for these workers. So our refugee social work apprenticeship will hire bilingual or multilingual post-secondary refugee youth who will work alongside DHS social workers, Iowa court system juvenile justice officers, and our refugee specialists here at the Bureau, while also taking coursework at DMAC leading to an associate's degree in human services. So that by the time they complete their apprenticeship, they will have an associate's degree, which is a portable credential that they can then use to either qualify for additional education, since our social work 2 job, which is kind of one of our highest turnover jobs here at DHS, does require a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree and 2 years experience. So we believe by the time these refugees complete this apprenticeship, they would be qualified for hire as a social worker 2. They also, then we are aware that DMAC and Grandview have what's called a 2+2 program. So if that apprentice who graduates, completes, successfully gains their credential, were to desire to continue on to a bachelor, to a BSW, they can just roll right over to Grandview, do their last 2 years for their BSW. So this is, and basically where we are right now in this effort is I'm drafting the job description that we'll use to hire the first 2 refugees. And the whole point of our proposal to ORR is we know there are a lot of nonprofits that hire young, helpful refugees for this exact same role to help extend their services to customers from refugee cultures. And so we're hoping that as we get this formalized, pursue registration with Department of Labor to make it an official registered apprenticeship and all those kinds of things, that those agencies that also hire refugees to fulfill this role will be able to adopt it as a model to allow those kind of staff extenders a professional career track to enter the field that they're helping in. So when we think about why this is necessary, I need to come back to the idea of the iceberg, because a lot of these things that are below the surface that you never see, that are just part of our culture, just things that we all accept as, yeah, that's just general knowledge. Yeah. Facial expressions, religious beliefs, religious rituals, time, paintings, values, literature, child raising beliefs. That's a huge one. Concepts of leadership. All of these things are different. There are some refugee cultures where we would ask a refugee, what kind of job do you want? And they look at you with a very bewildered expression. Because in their culture, you go to a government office and you're told what your job will be. And what you want is irrelevant. So in some education systems in other parts of the world, starting from about age 14, you're put into your career track school. So you're not even going to be approved to study anything else because it's determined for you. Based on your test scores, you're going to be an accountant. And it's like, but I hate accounting. Oh, okay, well, you don't have to do that. But if you want any further schooling after age 14, it's going to be an accountant. So I guess the last question I want to ask all of you is, where are you? Where are you as far as this bridge? You know, are you willing to build your side of the bridge? And to me, being the, you know, the kind of the person from the dominant culture, to me, I think it is up to us to build most of that bridge and, you know, to be more welcoming about it. That's just my thought on that. So that's me. My contact info, we are with the Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services. And I guess any questions, conversation, anything we want to do from here? That's kind of what I had to say. So
thanks, Loren. We did have a question earlier about, I believe, asylum applications and what happens if they are denied, if you want to touch on that.
Well, if they're denied, they can obviously appeal that decision. But ultimately, if they're denied, there may also be an order of removal where they're either told they need to get out, or they may even be put in the line for being deported.
Okay. Thank you.
So my name is Mugisha Bwenge, and I'm with United We March Forward. So United We March Forward is a nonprofit organization that I started 2 years ago. And I myself am an immigrant at age 4. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And at age 4, due to conflict and unsettling issues, we did have to seek refuge to Tanzania. Um, Fortunately, my father was here in Iowa, so he helped us migrate here to the United States. I've been very fortunate to attend elementary all the way to college, graduating as a nurse. And so first of all, I want to say thank you for everything that you're doing. I think a lot of time there's things that we just don't understand. Here in America, I love America. And I think I say when I speak with a lot of immigrants, they look at America as the milk and honey land, the land of prosperity. And I think sometimes we forget that, when immigrants are coming here, this is like it's like heaven for them. So first of all, thank you for the services that you continue to do to help families who are displaced. A lot of them coming here not by choice, but because of poverty, because of war, because of rape, and so on and so on. And the list goes on. So I mean, first of all, I wanted to just make sure I acknowledge that, because I do believe you have to give credit to where it's due, and America has been doing a lot of great things to help families. And so for us as an organization, what we focus on is community development and economic opportunity for immigrants who are coming here. And what I've seen, when serving immigrants, I as an immigrant, when I attend funerals and other things, it's more of a community liaison approach, because each immigrant sometimes is unique. The services may not always be the same. So sometimes they need that one-on-one person to communicate with and understand, okay, my struggle is getting my kids to school. That's what I need help with. Or my struggle is learning English. So that's the approach that, then we have to then take. It's not, it's services to immigrants, it's not always a one thing fit all. And sometimes when you provide service to an immigrant and you are able to accomplish that, they really trust you. And then they come to you with many other issues. Oh, I have a loved one in Africa. Can you bring them? Oh, I want to get a job. Oh, I want to learn English. And I think just going down to Loren, what you were saying about serving immigrants and refugees, other things that we do have to understand is the culture, because a lot of time there's also conflicts in the immigrant community. One example, I think is 1994, Rwanda had the genocide, and in 100 days, 800,000 people died because of ethnic conflicts. And some of the families started fleeing to Congo, Tanzania, Burundi. So when families were coming to the United States, we see immigrants as immigrants and refugees, but then there's still that conflict. Someone from Burundi is going to look at, you're Rwandese, your people killed our people.
Yeah.
You're Congolese, you're this and this. And I think sometimes those culture, sometimes we don't understand them, because they're embodied in them. Because if they're coming from poverty, if they're coming fleeing war, who's causing the war? Who's causing the poverty? Who's causing the conflict? So then if you don't know what's really going on, you could be servicing 100 people, but within the 100 people, there's also chaos. Are the interpreters providing a proper interpretation to those families? Because maybe they're looking at it, you might benefit, but you killed my family back a long time ago. So I'm not going to interpret very well. So there's I think there's so much, and we've done a lot of great things. And I think the approach that you guys are taking as far as providing education and getting the younger generation, their mentality, they're not looking at that. Same thing with me. I don't believe in all that. I don't believe that if you're in America, that there should be any division. There should be equal opportunity to anyone that's seeking that. So I think what you're saying, the apprenticeship and so on, those are really great things. And uh, uh, I think another thing too is sometimes is knowing where our immigrants coming from. Um, some immigrants who are here, they're bringing their wife through a K-1 visa or other things, and I think that's also how the growth is getting bigger, because you already have immigrants and refugees settled here, so now they're wanting to bring their families, and I think that's also another area to really look at on how the growth continues to grow. So for me, as a as an immigrant myself, on behalf of all immigrants, I want to say thank you for the services you guys continue to do. And I know we do have a long way, but every little bit that we do, I think, I know it makes a big impact. And here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as an immigrant and um, our board of directors are all, well, majority of them, I say majority of them are immigrants. But what we continue to do is continue to work alongside other partners and agencies, because that's the only way we can get far too. It has to be a collaborative effort to really help the families that we're wanting to do. So anyways, I could go on and on, but just so thank you. And I've
Thank
been
you.
really listening, and it's been very informative.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And you're absolutely right. Refugees don't leave whatever conflict they fled back home. I mean, neither do we. I mean, we don't leave our beliefs, our cultural beliefs, back home when we go on vacation, or if we found ourselves in a foreign land because and for whatever reason we can't return home. We still have our cultural beliefs that are part of us. And so, yeah, for a lot of refugees, there is that difficulty in saying, how do I turn away from these conflicts that have gone on for generations? That, my belief about this other culture that is in my part of the world is something that I believe, my parents believe, their parents believe, their parents believe, back hundreds of years. And the simple fact that I found a way to stay safe, keep myself and my family safe in a place, in a land where I'm allowed to live in peace, you know, and work hard to support my family. That's, you're still not going to let go of generations and generations of ethnic conflict. It's just not possible. And so, part of the healing process, because every refugee has survived some sort of trauma, they had to. But when you think about the strength those people have, oftentimes to flee their home with nothing more than they can carry, and that includes children, if the children are too young to go on a very long march. Think of that. And that's one of the things that makes me love this work so much, is routinely I get just a regular reminders of the sheer power of the human spirit to overcome horrors most of us can't even imagine. and to just start over and to just say, okay, if this is the situation, I will take myself and whatever of my family members I can keep and hold with me through the process. I will go wherever I need to go if I can be allowed to live in peace and work hard for my family. Why wouldn't we want to? Why wouldn't we want to help with that? I do. So would you be willing to email me your contact info? Just because we do have some things for refugee and immigrant oriented organizations that we like to at least send information out about. So if we could add you to those lists, that I would appreciate that.
I'll go ahead and put your contact information in the chat, Loren.
Oh, sure.
You want to, or anybody else wants to reach out. I also put in there the website for United We March Forward as well. Let's see.
Okay, so I just did my, oh no, I misspelled it, sorry. I'm not great at not proofreading typing.
And
okay, yeah, the second one is correct, not the first one with the extra A in it. So
great. And this will all be available as well, like I said, on our website in case you or your staff or your colleagues have missed this session. They can tune in again. Hopefully it'll be up tomorrow, depending on how slow my computer wants to be. But yeah.
Well, I can email you the PowerPoint slides too.
Please do.
Yep. Okay, other questions, comments folks had? Looks like we still have a few minutes left.
Not seeing any in the chat.
I guess I'll ask away. So with the job for immigrants and refugees, are there any approach as far as getting families to be able to work locally? Because as you said, you know, many immigrants and refugees that do come, I mean, they're working at factories and production lines. Has there been some conversation as far as getting families to work locally? I mean, if you're a single parent and you have, you know, you have to provide for your family. As far as has there been some conversation, you know, getting families to work in local companies?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a big part of what we do here at the Bureau of Refugee Services is help individual refugees. Our funding is limited to refugees and asylees. There are a few other immigration statuses, but that we can serve through the Bureau. But any immigrant who would inquire about specific services from us, if they're not eligible to be served through the Bureau's staff, we would be trying to at least identify other resources in the community that help with those kinds of things. But we're the promised jobs provider for refugees statewide. So if a refugee applies for any sort of TANF assistance, Iowa's welfare program, they would be referred to the Promised Jobs program, and we would be working with them on finding a job.
And I know, like with refugees, do you guys qualify that after 5 years they're no longer refugees? What's the time frame as far as the opportunity?
Technically, refugees are not allowed to even apply to become citizens until they've been in the United States for almost 5 years. So 4 years, 9 months, I believe, is the minimum time frame. Refugees are required to do something at the end of their first year in the US called adjustment of status, which is basically applying for the green card. And then they get the green card, and that gives them, it's an easier document to use for work authorization than the I-94 form that refugees arrive with. from overseas. The I-94 form does work for going to work. Like I said, refugees are lawful permanent residents from the day they arrive. So they're work authorized for all that time. But to your specific question about the 5-year things, in normal times, yes, any refugee who has been in the US longer than 5 years can't be served by us without some kind of special permission from our funder, which we occasionally ask for. But right now, Iowa is operating under a waiver due to the pandemic, and we can serve refugees who have been in the US longer than 5 years. So if a refugee who has been here longer than 5 years is needing this type of assistance, call our 800 number, and we will, you know, at least process an application to determine if they're eligible. Now, if they've become a citizen, we can't assist, because we have to then refer them to mainstream resources that are available for citizens. And we do work with those agencies on how you know, can they provide culture and language appropriate services to people from refugee cultures. And we're happy to try and help with that as much as we can. But sadly, yes, if they've attained citizenship, they're no longer eligible to receive services through the Bureau.
You had stated that the language proficiency program. I'm sorry, I'm just, you know, I'm just
No
interested in learning more. Language proficiency program where they learn a certain amount of words. Now, is that on the job, or is that more an outside program or class curriculum that they go to?
This is a 4-week full immersion English training program that we offer here at the Bureau. And we're currently looking at, can we adapt it for remote delivery, or when will we be permitted to go back to offering in-person instruction? You know, the pandemic has thrown us for a lot of loop, and we are looking at how do we grow our service presence in Cedar Rapids specifically, since we're seeing growing refugee populations, particularly among our Congolese refugees coming to Iowa, have really found the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area, to Waterloo also to some extent, to be a great place to live. And as a state, we want to welcome anybody who wants to live here and work hard, raise a family. You know, we got plenty of room here in Iowa and plenty of jobs. I mean, during the most recent, obviously before COVID, the most recent recession, Iowa's unemployment rate stayed way, way low because we have so many opportunities, particularly in the food processing area. You know, people have different ideas about that work, but we also know that refugees can do that work even if they don't speak a word of English. And, you know, oftentimes the pay rates there exceed the pay they could get anywhere else in the country. And so for many refugees, that's, even though the work is hard, physical labor, that's a better option for them than, you know, a minimum wage, possibly part-time job that might not be quite so physically strenuous.
Yeah, and I mean, the aspect of affordable living too is another key factor. So that's great. That's great. Well, I know right now the pandemic has delayed a few things, but I think when the pandemic goes down, I know in my head, I think I know about 10 different family households that are expecting their loved ones to come to America. And right now they have slowed the process. So the growth is going to happen. And I think, you know, conversations like this and getting people informed, I think, we have to be ready and have the tools, you know, in order to help families. I mean, I was just looking at because I think, you know, it's really great to have, you know, many opportunities. I think I was reading on, I was doing I was doing a research, and I mean, if you look at the immigrant population, they contribute a lot. I think was it 2012 to 2017, there was like over 40% growth contributed to population growth of immigrants here in Cedar Rapids. I think was 40% or something over that. Over 300 millions, you know, income from immigrant families. I think that was just in Cedar Rapids. And then you have, I think, over 200 million in spending power. I mean, that's all contribution, you know, that immigrants are providing to our economy, you know. So, and that data is from, I believe, New America Economy.
Yeah.
And also Gazette has some other information. So, you know.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the study, and in the year that they conducted that study, nationwide, just refugees contributed $51 billion in taxes to our economy. Refugees, there was a study done in the early 2000s in the Cleveland area that said the average payback for everything, every last dollar that goes into resettling a refugee in the US is paid back over the next 12 and a half years. So one of the things I ask people is, would you give your sister a 12 and a half year loan if that's what it took to keep her and the kids from getting killed? Of course you would. Come on. You dig as deep as you need it to. That's what we're doing. So let's get back to that.
Well, I'm going to thank you guys for such a great conversation. We are inching up on our time here, but like I said, feel free to reach out to Loren. He's a great resource. Reach out to me. I can connect you to anyone on this call. But yeah, thank you all for joining us today and all the great input. Loren, especially thank you for all this information. And like I mentioned in the chat, this will all be available, both the recording and a link to the presentation slides on our website under the professional development tab as soon as tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that.
Thanks.
Thank you guys.